Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. So much of your personal info is out of your control, like your insurance provider that has your social security number and your favorite retailer that has your payment details. If they get breached, your information, your identity, is vulnerable. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Do you like the Daily Blast but want even more analysis of the biggest headlines from around the world? Do you want an ad-free listening experience so there's nothing between you and expert commentary every day? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, where you'll also gain access to exclusive content across all of the DSR Network podcasts. Listeners of the Daily Blast can get 30% off of a monthly or annual membership using code BLAST at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code BLAST at thedsrnetwork.com/buy.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week, after Donald Trump won the presidential election, Jeff Bezos issued an extraordinary tweet. He didn't just congratulate Trump on his victory, he also went out of his way to hail Trump's extraordinary political comeback. We think this is a bad sign of what's coming. People in key institutional positions going out of their way to curry favor with Trump in advance. How bad is that going to get, and what will the consequences be? Well, Will Bunch, national columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, wrote a very good column about this, arguing that this bended knee to Trump suggests the beginning of America's strongman era. So he invited Will on to talk about it. Good to have you on, Will.
Yeah, hey Greg, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
First, I want to read the tweet from Jeff Bezos, who is in the top 5 richest people in the world and owns the Washington Post, where I used to work. It said this, quote, "Big congratulations to our 45th and now 47th president on an extraordinary political comeback and decisive victory. No nation has bigger opportunities. Wishing Donald Trump all success in leading and uniting the America we all love." Well, the line about Trump's extraordinary political comeback and decisive victory is telling. I mean, that's going out of his way to unctuously suck up to Trump by fluffing his comeback narrative, which Trump loves. What's your reaction to all this?
Yeah, you're right, Greg. It was an extraordinarily fawning tweet, coming from a man who, obviously first and foremost, he's the founder of Amazon, and that's where his wealth comes from. But he's the owner of the Washington Post, and he knows with the Post comes this watchdog responsibility, right, to cover the new administration fairly, and and it's something he's aware of. He talked about it when he bought the paper back in 2013, and you can question the wisdom of sending any kind of tweet at all, but this just sounded so over the top, and it's kind of fascinating because it comes in the wake of a big controversy, as probably a lot of your listeners know about. The Post has been generally making endorsements in presidential races since Watergate, since 1976, and the editorial staff had prepared an editorial endorsing Kamala Harris. They'd worked on it for a long time, and at the last minute, Jeff Bezos told them not to publish it. That, hey, we decided we're going to get out of the endorsement business, and the timing raised a lot of eyebrows, but especially because, as it turns out, Amazon, his main source of his wealth, uh, does a lot of business with the federal government. You wouldn't necessarily think so, but they're in the cloud computing business, and they have a large cloud computing business contract with, among other things. He also, just like his fellow billionaire Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos has this space venture called Blue Origin, and it actually came out, and it may have been a coincidence. It probably was, but on the very day that Bezos told his editors not to publish the endorsement, some of his executives from Blue Origin actually met Trump at an event down in Austin, Texas. So one reaction to authoritarian regimes is people tend to not even take orders, but just in advance on their own, take actions that they think will please the authoritarian leader. Timothy Snyder from Yale calls this obeying in advance.
Yeah, no, he does. And I want to bring up some other signs of our institutions getting weak-kneed in the face of Trump, both before the election and after. We just learned that the Department of Justice may be winding down its cases against Trump.
Right.
That comes after the Supreme Court delayed Trump's trial for his insurrection, enabling him to kick it until after the election, which will let him cancel prosecutions of himself. He viciously attacked media organizations in the run-up to this election. And whether this is the reason or not, some of them kind of capitulated. We saw some networks, for instance, doing a soft pedal at some of these debates by not fact-checking. And I think it's pretty clear that Trump sees that and says to himself, it's working. And so what more do you anticipate coming along these lines once Trump gets into power?
Wall Street Journal reported that the National Archivist actually changed a historical exhibit to do things like take out Martin Luther King or take out references to treatment of Native Americans out West, because she was worried apparently that any negative portrayals of American history would offend Republicans next year. And correctly anticipating that this was like a month or two ago or a few months ago, and staff members leaked this to the Wall Street Journal. But she correctly, as it turns out, anticipated Republican control of the government. But it's throwing history down the memory hole, to use another Orwellian phrase. But any institution that we consider to be a possible check and balance on unbridled power, so Congress, for example, but the media definitely, the courts, there's all sorts of places to look for people, in unlikely places like the National Archives, where you can look for people making decisions of saying, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to say something that's going to get me in trouble with the Trump administration.
On that score, Will, I think that we should keep in mind that once Trump kind of purges the government of real civil servants, real independent civil servants, and starts replacing them with MAGA loyalists, you could be in a situation where remaining civil servants who actually aren't MAGA actually muzzle themselves, both in terms of putting out good government data that contradicts the Trump propaganda line, and in terms of not letting people know, blowing the whistle, when higher-ups, MAGA loyalist types, corrupt the agency. I think that's a big problem as well, don't you? I mean, the example you just cited there really goes to that.
Yeah, and I think for all we know, that could even start happening right now, because there was a lot of conversation over the last year about this Project 2025 blueprint that was drafted by the Heritage Foundation and others, but had heavy involvement from people close to Trump and Trump loyalists, and many people see it as the blueprint for a Trump administration. And really the linchpin of that whole plan is firing thousands of people who are now career civil servants, and replacing them with MAGA loyalists. So think about it. Right now, at this point, when Trump's been elected and he hasn't taken office yet, you probably, you're saving up to send your kids to college, or you just don't want to be unemployed. You're probably thinking about, how do I not get on Trump's list?
Will, another question here, and you wrote about this, is will there be meaningful popular resistance if and when Trump starts making good on his authoritarian threats, such as prosecuting people without cause, the mass deportations with camps and the military, and the purging of the government we just talked about? My fear is that the public will be so fractured and targets of this stuff will be isolated from each other that it'll be hard to mount any kind of genuine resistance. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're already seeing signs, both just anecdotally and bigger than that, uh, that the people who you might expect to resist Trump, people on the left, just base Democrats, are very demoralized, and I don't just mean demoralized by what happened Tuesday, but more broadly. I've heard from several people in the last couple days who were incredibly active in what became known colloquially as the Trump resistance, right, in 2017, 2018. People who joined indivisible type groups, who did protests, mailed postcards to people, knocked on doors in the 2018 election. And, some of these people told me that they're out, that they're, getting off X/Twitter and disengaging from politics, and said goodbye, saying, "Oh, Will, I love your columns, but I just have to take a break. I have to go for now." Or I got one email from a woman who has been emailing regularly for the last 8 years about Trump and what's going on, and she said she's just thoroughly disillusioned, and she's out. She's not gonna, she was one of the first people to join Indivisible, and she's not going to do it anymore. And it's to quote the famous Sherlock Holmes line, this is the dog that isn't barking right now. At this time in 2016, there were people marching through the streets of Philadelphia and other cities, and they were, chanting things like, "We reject the president-elect." They had, if you remember, people had those signs, "Not my president." High school kids were walking out of high schools to protest Trump. Lots of things were happening on college campuses, and they were, in a lot of cases, encouraged by college administrators. College presidents issued statements saying they were alarmed by the possibilities of what could happen to America under Trump. Those things all happened in 2016 and into 2017. None of them are happening right now. I mean, if you remember kind of the hallmark event of the first month of the Trump administration, it was when he tried to impose his so-called Muslim ban. And it created this situation at airports where people who were in the middle of traveling during this ban were, in this Kafkaesque limbo at airports. And hundreds of resistance type activists rushed to these airports, and they were joined by members of Congress, and they had protests. And I really have a hard time imagining that happening now. I mean, authoritarian movements thrive on this kind of, whatever you want to call it, disillusionment, nihilism. That's the atmosphere in which autocratic regimes do their dirty work.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
Yeah, I think that that's really alarming. I'm hoping that people just need a short break and that when the madness really starts, they'll get energized. I want to.
Yeah, maybe.
It's right. I mean, we'll see. I want to remind everybody of a Trump quote from before the election that got weirdly overlooked. He told Hugh Hewitt that he would fire Jack Smith in 2 seconds, but he added, crucially, "We got immunity at the Supreme Court." So Trump is going into this thinking he can do whatever he wants, and he's probably not wrong about that. How do you think about this? I mean, are there institutional checks? What sort of institutional checks are there?
I think the best one would be for certain things, Congress. I mean, we certainly assume that there are some things, certain types of tax cuts that he's talked about, for example, that he would need congressional approval from. Now, with slim majorities, it looks like in both parties, we don't know for sure about the House yet, but are they enough votes to be a rubber stamp? They might be, given the way the Republican Party operates. Most people think, if you really wanted to mass deport, hundreds of thousands, if not like a few million people, you probably would have to like federalize the National Guard. And, would you federalize the National Guard in blue states? Is Josh Shapiro, for example, going to let Trump federalize the Pennsylvania National Guard to do deportations?
Well, I'll tell you what, Will. I actually did some reporting on this, and Democratic attorneys general are preparing to resist any illegal orders that Trump delivers to the National Guard. We saw some encouraging signs today. California Governor Gavin Newsom announced that he's holding a special legislative session. He's going to try and figure out ways to Trump-proof the state from that sort of threat. J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, just said today that Trump, if he wants to go after Pritzker's people, he'll have to go through him. So I think we're already seeing some signs that governors in blue states are preparing to mount a real bulwark against authoritarianism. I do think that he's going to struggle to pull off the mass deportations because it would require a substantial expansion in resources, and I don't think he's going to get that even from Republicans in Congress. Maybe some of it, but not all of it for sure. And it's very hard to pull off something like those mass deportations. There are immense logistical and legal hurdles in the way of it.
Yeah, Radley Balco, your former colleague at the Post, did a real in-depth analysis of all the logistics of what it would take to pull off mass deportation. And I think one of the most alarming numbers was, that the cost of this operation would be at least as much or not more as the budget of the entire U.S. Army, some $210 billion. And that was using some conservative estimates, frankly. So, yeah. And again, would you need Congress, and would Congress be able to approve those? Remember, Trump has also promised to cut all sorts of taxes. He has a program to cut taxes on, mostly the wealthy and billionaires, but, and his other promises to cut taxes on overtime and tips. And the numbers just don't seem to add up at all.
Yeah, I think that it would not really be workable for him. Let's close this out, Will. What are the prospects for resistance to some of this stuff? It'll require pressure on the Jeff Bezoses of the world when they capitulate, right? In other words, we have to try to bring popular pressure to bear on institutions to kind of shore them up, right? What are the prospects for that, and what's your sort of long-term prognosis here?
Well, initially the prospects look promising. The Post is a great example, right? Because when Bezos canceled, spiked that endorsement of Kamala Harris, there was a huge reaction from the Post customers and subscribers. And the number of people who canceled their subscriptions to the Washington Post, 250,000 people, or basically 1/10 or 10% of all their subscribers. That's a gigantic economic hit, and it's very unfortunate, frankly, for the people, some of the great journalists who work there now. But so people were willing to vote with their dollars, and but on the other hand, you can look at it and say, well, look, the customers did that, and then Trump won, and then here's Bezos with this unctuous, obsequious tweet, thanking Trump. So he obviously wasn't worried about losing more subscribers, but yes, there are certainly things that the average person can do. I think right now it's hard to say 2 days after the election, because right now I think people aren't thinking along those lines. I think these ideas about how to protest or how to resist, they tend to be viral. They tend to spread like wildfire, because if you remember what happened in 2016, it was basically one woman in Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken, uh, posting on the what was it called? Pantsuit Nation. It was like a pro Hillary Clinton website saying that, hey, we should all go to Washington the day after Trump is inaugurated and have this march. And just from that one person's rando online comment, you had this women's march that drew several million people. I think, was it 3 to 5 million people all over the country in different cities. And um, I don't think the conditions are quite there at the moment for anything like that this time around. But what I'm saying, though, is somebody could have a totally different idea about how to protest the new Trump administration, that everybody's going to fall in love with. And because I think I do think people are looking for hope. People do want something they can do. Nobody seems to know what that is at that point. But if somebody comes up with something that catches fire, like the Women's March did in 2016, 2017, we'll have to see if that happens.
Will Bunch, fascinating stuff, man. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thanks for inviting me, Greg. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.